In this episode, we're going to explore how security becomes something the organization actually does, rather than something the organization occasionally reacts to. The key idea is integration. Security controls need to be part of normal business processes so they work consistently, even when people are busy and deadlines are tight. When controls are bolted on at the end, they feel disruptive because they arrive late, create surprises, and often require rework. When controls are integrated, they feel more like guardrails than roadblocks because they guide decisions early and reduce the chances of a painful failure later. For beginners, it is helpful to think of a control as any repeatable safeguard that reduces risk, such as limiting access, verifying identity, logging important actions, or requiring review before sensitive changes. By the end of this lesson, you should understand how to blend controls into everyday processes so security improves without constantly slowing work down. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A business process is simply the set of steps people follow to get something done, like onboarding an employee, launching a new product feature, paying a vendor, or changing a system configuration. Security gets disrupted when it tries to change a process without understanding why the process exists and what it is trying to optimize. Many business processes are designed to reduce cost, reduce time, or reduce operational friction, and if security adds steps that feel unnecessary, people will resist or work around them. This is why integrating security requires empathy for the process and clarity about what risk the control is addressing. A well-integrated control fits the process like a built-in safety check, not like a surprise inspection. The control should be designed so it is as light as possible while still providing meaningful protection for the specific risk involved. One major concept here is that not every process needs the same level of security control because risk is not evenly distributed. If security applies the highest level of rigor everywhere, the organization will slow down and people will begin to see security as unreasonable. If security applies too little rigor where it matters most, critical assets and sensitive data become exposed. The practical approach is risk-based integration, where controls are stronger for higher impact activities and lighter for lower impact activities. For example, changing a system that supports a critical service should have stronger review and stronger logging than changing a low-impact internal tool. Handling sensitive customer data should require stronger access controls and monitoring than handling public information. This is how security reduces disruption. It targets controls where they protect the most, and it avoids over-controlling areas where the risk is low. To integrate controls well, you start by understanding the process flow and where decisions and handoffs happen. Controls are most effective when they are placed at points where a decision is being made, such as approving access, approving a change, selecting a vendor, or defining a product feature. If you place controls after the work is done, the control becomes a blocker because it catches problems late and forces rework. If you place controls early, the control becomes guidance because it shapes the work while it is still flexible. For example, asking security to review a design before development begins is far less disruptive than asking security to approve a release hours before launch. The control is the same idea, but the timing transforms it from a disruptive gate to a helpful guardrail. Another essential idea is that controls should be designed to be repeatable and predictable. People accept friction when it is consistent and when they can plan for it. They reject friction when it is unpredictable and when it depends on who happens to be reviewing at the moment. Predictability means having clear criteria for what triggers a control, clear expectations for what the control checks, and clear turnaround times for review activities. It also means creating a stable pathway for exceptions when the organization must take a calculated risk, because a rigid system with no exception path encourages people to bypass controls entirely. The goal is not to make controls optional. The goal is to make compliance with controls easier than avoidance. When controls are predictable, they become part of normal planning rather than a last-minute surprise. Controls also work best when they reduce cognitive burden, meaning they make the secure choice easier without requiring people to constantly remember complex rules. Beginners sometimes assume security is mostly about teaching people to be careful, but the more reliable approach is designing processes so safe behavior is built in. For example, if new employees automatically receive only the access they need for their role, you reduce the chance of overprivilege without asking managers to remember every rule. If system changes require a simple documented impact check for sensitive data, you reduce the chance of accidental exposure without requiring every engineer to be a policy expert. If logging is enabled by default for critical systems, you reduce the chance of blind spots without relying on memory. These are examples of controls that work quietly in the background, which is the best kind of control from a disruption standpoint. A common barrier to integration is that security controls are sometimes designed without considering operational reality. If a control is too heavy, too slow, or too unclear, teams will treat it as an obstacle and either fight it or bypass it. A practical security leader gathers feedback from the teams who will live with the control and adjusts the design so the control meets its risk goal with minimal waste. This might mean simplifying the required information for a review, clarifying definitions so teams know what is expected, or reducing unnecessary approvals by delegating routine decisions. It might also mean focusing on high-impact areas first rather than trying to transform every process at once. Integration succeeds when controls are seen as supportive and fair, not as arbitrary hurdles. When security demonstrates it can improve its own processes, trust increases and adoption improves. Integration also involves selecting the right kind of control for the problem. Some controls prevent problems, like limiting access or requiring review before a sensitive change. Some controls detect problems, like monitoring and alerting on unusual behavior. Some controls correct problems, like having recovery procedures that restore service quickly after an incident. Many security failures happen when the organization relies too heavily on one category, such as investing in detection but neglecting prevention, or writing policies that prevent on paper but not in practice. When integrating controls into business processes, you want a balanced approach where prevention reduces common mistakes, detection catches what slips through, and correction limits damage when something goes wrong. This balance reduces disruption because it prevents small issues from turning into big incidents that force emergency work. In other words, good control design trades a little planned effort for a lot less unplanned chaos. Another important idea is aligning controls with ownership and accountability. If a business process includes a control but no one owns the control's outcome, the control becomes a formality rather than a safeguard. For example, if access approvals happen but no one reviews whether access remains appropriate over time, privileges accumulate and risk grows quietly. If change reviews happen but no one checks whether identified risks were actually mitigated, the review becomes a checkbox. Integrated controls need owners, clear completion criteria, and a way to verify that the control is functioning as intended. Verification does not have to be heavy. It can be periodic sampling, simple reporting, or targeted checks on high-risk areas. The key is that the organization must be able to trust that the control is real, not just written down. Minimal disruption also depends on how security communicates about controls. If security describes controls as demands, teams will hear them as obstacles. If security describes controls as risk-based safeguards that protect outcomes teams care about, teams will see them as support. Communication should explain the purpose of the control, the risk it addresses, and what success looks like in practical terms. It should also explain what teams can expect from security, such as review timelines and how to ask questions. Clear communication reduces confusion, and reducing confusion reduces delays and frustration. This is part of integration because a control that people do not understand will not be used consistently, and inconsistent controls create uneven risk and surprise failures. Over time, integrating controls into business processes is one of the best ways to reduce security friction overall, because it shifts security from reactive interruptions to planned, routine behavior. When controls are built into onboarding, change management, product development, vendor management, and incident response, security becomes part of how the organization operates. That reduces the number of last-minute escalations, emergency fixes, and crisis-driven meetings, which is the real meaning of minimal disruption. You are not eliminating effort. You are moving effort earlier and making it predictable, so the organization spends less time in chaos. When controls are risk-based, repeatable, and aligned to ownership, they protect the organization while respecting the pace of business. That is how security becomes both effective and workable in the real world.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.